The sound that finally broke the foundation of my marriage wasn't a gunshot or a scream. It wasn't the shattering of glass or the slam of a door. It was the quiet, electric hum of a garage door motor, followed by the gentle thud of the door sealing itself against the concrete floor. It was 8:14 on a Saturday morning. Marcus was leaving for his weekly round of golf, a 4-hour ritual that was as predictable as the sun rising over Durham. The house, which had been holding its breath while he gathered his clubs and whistled a tune he'd heard on the radio, seemed to exhale in the sudden silence. And in that exhale, I could feel the entire structure of our life groan, settling into a new, final shape. By the back door, hidden from the sightline of the garage, sat 2 suitcases and a banker's box. They were not packed in anger. They were assembled with the cool, methodical precision of a project plan, each item a line on a checklist I had been composing in my head for 182 days. The temperature in the house felt different, the air suddenly clean and sharp. It was the temperature of a survey, measured and drawn, every line straight, every angle true. My name is Yvette. I'm 33 years old, and for the last 6 years, I have been Marcus's wife. I am a civil engineer. I spend my days designing bridges, overpasses, and public works, the bones and sinews that hold a city together. I understand stress loads and material integrity. I know that a structure's strength isn't in its grand arches or its soaring height, but in its foundation, in the unseen rebar, in the precise mixture of the concrete, in the 1,000 small calculations that ensure it can bear the weight of the world without complaint. For years, I believed a marriage was the same, a structure built of shared moments and quiet promises, reinforced over time until it felt permanent, immovable. I learned slowly at first, and then all at once, that you can build the most beautiful bridge in the world, but if the ground it's built on is a lie, it's not a bridge. It's just a monument to its own eventual collapse. The lie that brought it all down wasn't some grand theatrical betrayal. It was small, casual, and constant. It was a sentence he used like a shield, a phrase he polished until it gleamed with the false light of sincerity. It happened 2 weeks before that final Saturday. He had come home late from a work dinner that I knew hadn't happened. I didn't challenge him. I was long past that. I simply watched him as he moved through the kitchen, his motions a little too smooth, his cheerfulness a little too bright. He saw the look on my face, the quiet exhaustion I no longer bothered to hide. He came over, wrapped his arms around my waist from behind as I stood at the sink, and rested his chin on my shoulder. He smelled of a perfume that wasn't mine, and the stale air of a bar, not a restaurant. He felt the tension in my shoulders, the way I didn't lean back into him. "Tough day?" he asked, his voice soft. I just nodded, continuing to wash a plate that was already clean. He sighed, a theatrical sound of loving exasperation. "Come on, Yvette. Talk to me. Don't shut me out." He turned me around to face him, his hands gentle on my arms. He searched my face, performing concern. "Whatever you're thinking, just stop. You know you can trust me." He paused, letting the weight of his declaration settle in the air between us. Then he delivered the line, the one he always used when he felt my belief in him beginning to fracture. "I'd never lie to you," he said, his eyes holding mine. "That's not who I am. You know me." And in that moment, I felt nothing. Not anger, not betrayal, not even sadness. I just felt a profound and weary sense of recognition. It was the feeling an engineer gets when she looks at the final stress test report and sees the hairline fracture that confirms all her worst calculations. The structure had failed. It was no longer a question of if it would fall, but when. And I, the designer, would be the one to schedule the demolition. He said, "You know me." And for the first time, I realized I finally did. I knew the man who performed honesty far more than he practiced it. I knew the man who believed his words could overwrite his actions. And I knew that he had no idea that I had the blueprints to his deception folded neatly in a secure file on my laptop, dated 6 months prior. I just smiled, a thin, tired smile. "I know," I said. And he took it as an affirmation, not the epitaph it was. The erosion didn't happen overnight. It was a slow geological process. For years, I was the invisible infrastructure of Marcus's career. He was in sales for a mid-level tech firm, a job that required more charisma than substance, and I was his silent, uncredited project manager. Our Sunday afternoons had a ritual. He would spread the drafts of his sales contracts across my heavy oak desk in the office, the one I'd bought for my own work-from-home days. He'd sigh with manufactured frustration, running a hand through his hair. "These legal guys, Yvette," he'd say, shaking his head. "They're trying to kill this deal before it even starts. The language is too aggressive." I would pick up my red pen, the one with the fine, precise tip. I'd pull the papers toward me, the smell of toner and cheap copy paper filling the air. "Show me the clauses," I'd say. And for the next 2 hours, I would become his pro bono contract lawyer. I wasn't a lawyer, but as an engineer, I lived in a world of specifications, liabilities, and contractual obligations. I understood the architecture of language, where a single misplaced comma could create a loophole big enough to drive a truck through. I'd soften the indemnity clauses, rephrase the payment terms to be less confrontational, and add conditional phrases that gave his clients the feeling of control while preserving his company's position. I was looking for points of failure, for ambiguities that could be exploited later. I was, in essence, stress testing his professional relationships. He would watch, sipping a beer, occasionally pointing and saying, "Yeah, that's good. That sounds better." When I was finished, my red ink a delicate web over the dense black text, he would gather the pages, a look of genuine relief on his face. "You have such a good eye for this stuff," he'd say, kissing the top of my head. "You saved me again." He called it my good eye. He never called it work. He never called it the unpaid, expert labor of a highly trained professional who was giving him a competitive edge his colleagues didn't have. It was just a helpful quirk, like being good at remembering birthdays. The first few years, I felt a sense of partnership in it. We were a team. But as time went on, I noticed that the team was only ever mentioned in private. In public, the wins were always his. The most glaring example was the dinner. He was up for a promotion to regional manager, and it came down to him and one other candidate. The final test was a networking dinner with the executive team and their spouses. He wanted to host. "It's a power move," he'd said, pacing our living room. "It shows confidence. It shows we're a team." We. The word felt different that time. It felt like a requisition form. For 2 weeks, I planned that dinner like a civil engineering project. The guest list of 12 was a complex social equation. I researched each executive and their spouse, identifying potential conversational friction points and shared interests. I designed a seating chart that placed Marcus next to the senior VP's wife, who I'd learned was an avid gardener, a topic Marcus could feign interest in for exactly 7 minutes before getting lost. I placed myself across from the VP himself, ready to steer the conversation toward market trends and away from the technical details of the products Marcus sold, where his knowledge was shallow. The menu was a carefully calibrated performance of effortless elegance. a braised short rib that could cook for 8 hours unattended, a risotto that I could finish in the final 20 minutes, appetizers that could be prepped the day before. The house had to look perfect, welcoming but not sterile, lived in but not messy. I was the architect, the caterer, the hostess, and the social strategist. That night, Marcus was brilliant. He moved through the living room, our carefully curated playlist of mellow jazz humming in the background, a glass of wine in his hand, a charming anecdote always ready. He was relaxed, confident, the man of the house. He was relaxed because I had absorbed all the stress. I was the load-bearing columns hidden behind the decorative facade. I kept conversations flowing, wine glasses full, and steered Marcus away from conversational landmines with the subtlety of a tugboat guiding a freighter. At the end of the night, after dessert had been served and the coffee was poured, the senior VP, a man named Henderson, raised his glass. "Marcus," he said, his voice warm with good food and expensive wine. "This has been a fantastic evening. You and your wife have a beautiful home. You've really set the bar high." Marcus beamed. He stood up, raising his own glass. I felt a small, hopeful flutter. This was it. The moment he acknowledged the we. "Thank you, Jim," he said, his voice ringing with practiced humility. "It means a lot. It takes a great team to pull off a win, and I've always believed in building the best team around me." He smiled, looking around the table, but his eyes slid past me, landing on Henderson. He toasted the team, and everyone in the room knew he meant his team at work. In that moment, I wasn't his partner. I was the venue. I was the catering staff. I was a resource he had leveraged. I smiled and raised my glass, but the wine tasted like ash. He got the promotion 2 weeks later. When he came home with the news, he swung me around the kitchen and said, "We did it." The we had returned, now that the credit had been officially assigned to him. His sister Trina was the other pillar in the faulty architecture of our marriage. She was 2 years older than Marcus, sharp and fiercely protective in a way that often curdled into interference. In her eyes, Marcus was a brilliant, sensitive man constantly misunderstood by a demanding world, and I was, by extension, part of that demanding world. Her love for him was a fortress, and I was never granted full access. The drawbridge was always halfway up. Early in our marriage, I saw her influence as a benign, if annoying, family dynamic. "Trina's just protective," Marcus would say with a shrug after she'd made a passive-aggressive comment about my cooking or my work hours. "She doesn't mean anything by it. That's just how she shows she cares." I tried to believe him. I hosted her for holidays, remembered her birthday, and listened patiently as she recounted stories of their childhood, stories that always starred Marcus as the hero and her as his loyal sidekick. She was the keeper of his personal mythology. But over time, I started to notice a pattern. Trina wasn't just his historian, she was his alibi. It would be small things at first. Marcus would be late, and when he finally walked in, he'd say, "Sorry, babe, I got caught up helping Trina with her busted garbage disposal." An hour later, my phone would ping with a text from Trina. "Thanks for letting me borrow your husband, my hero." The coordination was a little too perfect, the exclamation points a little too cheerful. It was a performance for my benefit. I started to see her as his co-conspirator in the narrative of his own life. He wasn't just Marcus. He was Marcus and Trina, a single entity of mutual defense. If I questioned him, I was questioning them both. My doubts were not treated as valid concerns about my husband's behavior, but as an attack on their sacred sibling bond. The moment this shifted from a vague suspicion to a concrete fact happened 2 years ago during Christmas Eve dinner at Trina's house. Her home in Chapel Hill was always immaculately decorated, looking like a page out of a magazine, a curated coziness that always felt a little cold. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and roasting turkey. Marcus and Trina's mother was there, along with a few cousins. The conversation was loud and cheerful. I was helping Trina clear the appetizer plates when Marcus's phone, which he'd left face up on the granite countertop, lit up. I was standing right beside it. The screen was angled toward me, and the message preview was stark against the dark background. It was from a name I didn't recognize, Jessica. The message was short. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." The blood drained from my face. The sound of my own heartbeat was a sudden, violent drum in my ears, drowning out the festive chatter around me. For a split second, the entire room seemed to warp, the cheerful lights turning harsh and interrogative. I felt a physical shock, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. Trina saw my face. She saw where I was looking. Without breaking her stride or pausing the story she was telling her mother about a difficult client, she reached over, picked up the phone, and turned its screen down. Then, with a casualness that was more chilling than any overt act of malice, she slid it a few inches across the counter toward the spot where Marcus was standing, talking to his cousin. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, a flick of the wrist, but it was an act of deliberate concealment, an act of collusion. She had seen the message, understood its implications, and her immediate, instinctual reaction was to protect him from me, to hide the evidence. A moment later, Marcus came back to the counter to grab a napkin. He saw his phone, picked it up, and slipped it into his pocket without looking at the screen. He glanced from Trina's face to mine. My expression must have been a mess of shock and pain, his brow furrowed in performative concern. "You okay, Veta?" he asked. Before I could answer, Trina jumped in, her voice bright and breezy. "She's just tired. Yvette works too hard. We need to get you to relax, girl." She patted my arm, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like a warning. "Don't make a scene." I looked at her, then at Marcus. I saw the seamlessness of their alliance. They were a closed system. I was an outsider. The evidence of my own eyes was being actively denied, erased by a shared history I could never penetrate. Marcus looked at me, waiting for an answer. I could feel the question hanging in the air. "Are you going to be a problem?" I took a deep breath, the smell of pine and betrayal filling my lungs. I forced a smile. "She's right," I said, my voice thin. "Just a long week. I'm fine." Marcus accepted this instantly, his face clearing with relief. He didn't want to know more. He didn't want to dig. My compliance was all he required. He squeezed my shoulder. "Well, relax. It's Christmas." Later that night, as we were driving home, the silence in the car was heavy. I was replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The name on the screen, Trina's flick of the wrist, Marcus's oblivious relief. He must have sensed my withdrawal. He reached over and put a hand on my knee. "That was a nice night, wasn't it? My family loves you, you know." I didn't answer. He squeezed my knee gently. "Hey, what's going on in that beautiful head of yours?" "I saw a text on your phone," I said, my voice flat. "At Trina's." His hand froze. I felt his whole body go still. The car suddenly felt very small. He was silent for a long moment, calculating. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, searching for the right story, the right angle. "Oh, that," he said finally, his voice a careful blend of nonchalance and mild irritation. God, was that Jessica? She's a new hire on the West Coast team, super aggressive. She's been blowing up my phone all week. Totally unprofessional. I already told my boss about her. The lie was so quick, so comprehensive. It had a backstory, a motivation, a resolution. It was a prefabricated structure, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The message didn't sound very professional, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He sighed, the sound of a patient man dealing with an unreasonable child. Babe, you're reading into it. It's just how people talk in sales. All hype. It means nothing. He pulled his hand away from my knee and put it back on the steering wheel. Seriously, Yvette, I'd never lie to you. You know that. Why would I make something up? You'd see right through me. He said it with such conviction, he believed it. Or rather, he believed that I should believe it. His declaration of honesty was meant to be the end of the conversation. It was the final, load-bearing wall of his argument. To question it further would be to question the very foundation of his character, a foundation he presented as solid bedrock. That night I let him have it. I retreated into a silence he interpreted as acceptance. It was easier. But I knew, with the cold certainty of an engineer who has just discovered a fatal flaw in the design, that the entire structure was compromised. His sister wasn't just protective. She was the chief engineer of his deceit, and he was the willing beneficiary. This pattern contaminated everything. Happy memories began to curdle in my mind. I started re-examining our past through this new lens of performative honesty and calculated deception. I remembered the weekend he proposed. We had driven out to the Blue Ridge Parkway, the mountains draped in the hazy, romantic light of late autumn. We hiked to a scenic overlook, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. He had packed a thermos of hot chocolate and a blanket. We sat on a rocky outcrop, looking out at the endless waves of blue and green hills. He was charming and attentive, telling me stories, making me laugh. Then, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, he turned to me. His eyes were wide with what I, at the time, had believed was pure, unadulterated love. He took my hand. Yvette, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. From the moment I met you, I knew you were different. You're so solid, so real. With you, everything is just easy. He'd pulled out a small velvet box. I want that ease for the rest of my life. I had cried. I had said yes. I had glowed when he told me I made everything easy. I'd interpreted it as a compliment to my competence, my steadiness. Now, sitting in the silence of our car after that Christmas Eve, I heard his words for what they really were. It wasn't a love letter. It was a customer review. Easy didn't mean he felt a sense of peace with me. It meant I required no effort. I managed his world, his career, his social life, and I did it so seamlessly that my labor was invisible. I was a well-designed system, running quietly and efficiently in the background, allowing him to be the star of his own life without having to worry about the infrastructure that held him up. The proposal wasn't about building a life with me. It was about acquiring me as a high-functioning, all-inclusive life management service. The lies became more frequent after that Christmas, or perhaps I just became better at seeing them. They were rarely about anything that seemed, on the surface, to matter. A late night at the office was a beer with friends. A guy's weekend in Asheville involved a group of women I'd never heard of. Each time, there was a story, plausible and detailed. And each time, Trina was there, a supporting character in the fiction. "Oh my God, I told him not to stay so late," You know how he gets when he's on a deadline, she'd say to me over the phone, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. Or, I saw the pictures from the guys' trip. Looked like they had a blast hiking. She was constantly providing cover, laying down a foundation of plausible deniability for him to build his lies upon. He became bolder with his performances of transparency. Once, after I'd been quiet and distant for a few days, he sat me down on the couch, his face a mask of earnest sincerity. "Okay, what is it?" he asked, taking my hands. "I can feel something is wrong. I want us to be a team. I tell you everything. Ask me anything, I'll prove it." It was a dare, a challenge. He was so confident in the structures he and Trina had built that he was inviting me to inspect them, knowing I wouldn't find a handhold. The invitation to ask me anything wasn't an offer of honesty. It was a display of power. He was showing me how impenetrable his fortress was. I looked at him, at this man I had loved, this man whose contracts I still reviewed on Sundays, and I felt a vast, echoing emptiness. I didn't want to be a detective in my own marriage. I didn't want to cross-examine my husband. I just wanted a partner who didn't require constant verification. I shook my head. "I'm just tired, Marcus. It's nothing." And so, I let him believe he was winning. I let him believe his performances were convincing. I became a quiet, passive audience to the play he was staging for my benefit. I was biding my time, though I didn't know what I was waiting for. I just knew that the current state was unsustainable. A structure can only bear so much weight beyond its design specifications before the failure becomes catastrophic. I was waiting for the final, undeniable stress event. It arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon in April, 6 months before I finally left. It was an unremarkable day. The sky was a flat, washed-out gray, and a light rain was misting against the windows of my office. I was working from home, finalizing the structural drawings for a small pedestrian bridge. Marcus had left his phone on the charger in our bedroom. He rarely did that. His phone was usually attached to him like a vital organ. He'd been in a rush that morning, late for a meeting he'd forgotten about. I was folding a basket of laundry on our bed, the scent of fresh linen filling the room. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced over. It buzzed again. And again. It was a string of texts, and he hadn't enabled the privacy screen that hides the content on the lock screen. The name at the top was Trina. My hand stilled on a t-shirt I was folding. I didn't want to look. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn away, to leave it alone, to maintain the fragile peace of my own ignorance, but I couldn't. My eyes were drawn to the screen. The messages were all there, a neat little stack of instructions on the lock screen. Trina, heads up. Yvette seemed suspicious about last night. Trina, just stick to the story. You were with me. We were helping Mom sort through the attic. It's solid. Trina, I already mentioned to her I was dreading it on Monday, so the seed is planted. Trina, do not mention the bar. Or Sarah. Call me when you get this. I stood there, a warm folded t-shirt in my hands, and I read the messages 3 times. The world didn't shrink. My heart didn't hammer in my chest. There was no gut punch, no wave of nausea. Instead, a profound and absolute stillness settled over me. It was the moment an engineer, after months of calculations and soil samples and simulations, finally receives the geotechnical report confirming that the ground is fundamentally unstable. There is no surprise. There is no anger. There is only the cold, hard clarity of fact. The problem is no longer theoretical. It is proven. The seed is planted. The casual cruelty of that phrase. The premeditation. This wasn't a panicked, last-minute alibi. This was a coordinated, long-term strategy. They had a playbook. They had rehearsals. They were managing me like a hostile witness. I put down the t-shirt. My hands were perfectly steady. I walked over to the nightstand. I picked up my own phone, opened the camera, and took a clear, high-resolution photograph of his screen, capturing Trina's name and the full text of her messages. The click of the virtual shutter was the only sound in the room. Then I opened the photo, checked that it was clear and legible, and emailed it to my private, password-protected email account with the subject line, Geotechnical Report, April 12th. Then I put my phone down. I picked up his. My thumbprint, which he had so trustingly added years ago, opened it instantly. I navigated to his messages, found the thread with Trina, and scrolled up. It was a library of their collaboration. Months, years of it. Coaching sessions, alibi verifications, post-game analysis of conversations they'd had with me. She totally bought it. Close call, you owe me. Remember, we went to that hardware store in Cary, not Apex. It was all there, the intricate scaffolding of their deceit. I screenshotted a few of the most egregious examples, sending them to myself as well. Then, I closed the app, placed his phone back on the charger, screen down this time, exactly as I had found it. I went back to the bed, picked up the t-shirt, and finished folding the laundry. I put the basket away. I went back to my office, sat down at my desk, and looked at the blueprint for the pedestrian bridge on my screen. All those fine black lines, each one representing a precise calculation, a commitment to integrity, a promise of safe passage. And I knew my marriage was over. The decision wasn't made in that moment. The decision had been there for months, a latent crack in the foundation. Trina's texts were simply the dye-penetrant test, the colored liquid that seeps into the flaw and makes it starkly, undeniably visible to the naked eye. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or cry. To do so would have been to give him a problem to solve, a crisis to manage, a drama to perform in. It would have given him and Trina another story to co-author, another script to rehearse. My silence was not a sign of weakness or forgiveness. It was the beginning of my project plan, demolition and reconstruction. I had the proof. I had the final report. Now, all that was left was to choose the timeline. And it would be my timeline, not his. The 6 months that followed were the strangest of my life. On the outside, nothing changed. I was still Yvette, the quiet, competent wife. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I sat beside him on the couch and watched television. I even continued to review his contracts on Sundays, my red pen moving with the same steady precision. But on the inside, I was a woman living in a condemned building, calmly packing her belongings while waiting for the scheduled demolition date. The dramatic irony was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. My life had split into 2 parallel realities. In one, I was Marcus's supportive wife. In the other, I was the sole engineer on Project Exodus, a meticulously planned departure from a structurally unsound partnership. I began my preparations with the quiet efficiency of a site survey. During my lunch breaks, I researched apartments in downtown Durham, places with large windows and a spare room I could convert into a proper home office. I created a spreadsheet comparing rental costs, amenities, and proximity to my own job. I was no longer thinking in terms of our budget, only mine. My $98,000 salary, which had always been pooled into our joint account, a resource to be used for shared expenses, and his frequent whims, now looked different. It looked like freedom. It looked like a foundation. I opened a new bank account in my name only. Each payday, I diverted a portion of my direct deposit into it, a quiet reallocation of resources. I documented every shared asset, every joint liability. I was drawing the property lines of my new life. Marcus, oblivious, floated through these months in a state of blissful ignorance. In fact, our relationship seemed to improve from his perspective. Because I had stopped fighting, because I no longer questioned his late nights or his vague explanations, he relaxed. He mistook my detachment for contentment. He saw my calm as proof that his performances of honesty had finally worked, that he had soothed all my anxieties. One evening, he came home to find me at my laptop, cross-referencing my apartment spreadsheet with neighborhood safety data. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, kissing my hair. "Working hard?" he asked, trying to peer at my screen. I quickly switched tabs to my actual work email. "Just some project specs," I said, my voice even. "You're always working," he sighed, but it was an affectionate sigh. My brilliant, beautiful engineer. He hugged me tighter. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I just sat there, my body rigid, a stranger in my own home. I knew exactly what he would do without me. He would flounder. But he had no idea he was about to find out. His confidence in his own deceit became almost comical. About a month before I left, he was recounting a story about a conflict with a coworker. It was a long, rambling tale in which he was the clear hero, the voice of reason and integrity. He finished with a flourish, shaking his head in disbelief at the other man's supposed duplicity. "I just don't get people like that," he said, looking to me for affirmation. "Why would you make something up? It always comes out in the end. You know me, Yvette. I'm an open book. You'd see right through me anyway." He smiled, so proud of his own transparency. I looked at him, this man who was a complete stranger to me, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. He wasn't just lying to me. He was lying to himself. He had performed the role of the honest man for so long that he had begun to believe his own script. I just nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "It always comes out in the end." He took it as agreement. He didn't hear the promise. The final 2 weeks were a master class in holding my breath. I had signed a lease. The first and last month's rent were paid from my private account. The move-in date was a Saturday. I hired movers, a small discreet local company, for 9 a.m. I told them I was moving out of a storage unit. The Friday night before I left, we had what, on the surface, was a perfectly normal, happy evening. We ordered pizza. We watched a movie. He was in a great mood, having closed a big deal that week. A deal based on a contract I had spent 3 hours rewriting for him the previous Sunday. As the movie credits rolled, he turned to me, his eyes soft in the dim light of the television. "This is nice," he said. "Just us. Quiet." He took my hand. "I know I get busy. I know I'm not always the easiest guy to be married to, but I want you to know I appreciate you. I appreciate everything you do." It was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging my invisible labor. A year ago, those words would have been a healing balm. Now, they were just data. A final, desperate attempt from a failing system to reestablish equilibrium. He was offering a crumb of appreciation because he sensed, on some subconscious level, a shift in the balance of power. But it was too late. The demolition was already scheduled. "I know you do," I said, and squeezed his hand. I let him believe it. One more night. The next morning, I woke up early before the alarm. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale, gray light into our bedroom. Marcus was sleeping soundly beside me, a soft snore rumbling in his chest. I looked at him for a long time, not with anger, not with love. I looked at him like an engineer studying a failed structure, trying to pinpoint the exact moment of material fatigue. Was it the lies, the entitlement, the casual outsourcing of his conscience to his sister? It wasn't one thing. It was the aggregate load, 1,000 small compromises, 1,000 moments of tolerated disrespect, 1,000 instances of my labor being rendered invisible. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. I slipped out of bed. I moved through the house with a quiet purpose that I had been rehearsing for months. I made coffee, the familiar smell a strange comfort in the charged atmosphere. I listened for the sounds of him waking up, the shower, the clatter of his golf shoes on the hardwood floor, the cheerful off-key whistle. He came into the kitchen, already dressed in his golf polo and slacks, smelling of soap and confidence. He kissed me, a quick casual peck on the cheek. "Morning, babe." "Morning," I said, handing him a mug of coffee. My hand was perfectly steady. He took a sip. "Ah, perfect. You're the best." He glanced at the clock. "Gotta run. Tea time is 8:30. Don't want to be late." "Have a good game," I said. "Will do. Love you." "You too," I said. The words were automatic, a script I had known for years. They meant nothing. He walked to the garage door. He paused with his hand on the knob and looked back at me, a wide, easy smile on his face. "Don't work too hard today, okay?" I just nodded. Then he was gone. I stood in the kitchen, listening. The hum of the garage door motor, the thud as it closed, the sound of his car starting, the engine revving once before backing out of the driveway, then silence, a profound, echoing silence that filled every corner of the house. It was 8:14 a.m. The sight was clear. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air felt different, lighter. The house, our house, no longer felt like a home. It felt like a project site I was finally signing off on. I walked to the back door, where my suitcases stood like sentinels. Everything was ready. The movers would be here in 45 minutes. My personal papers, my clothes, the few sentimental items that were truly mine, they were all packed. Everything else, the furniture we'd picked out together, the art he'd liked, the kitchen gadgets he'd insisted on, could stay. They were part of a life that no longer belonged to me. There was one last task. I went back to the bedroom, to the small lacquered box on his dresser where he kept his cufflinks and tie clips. I opened it. His wedding ring was sitting there. He never wore it for golf. He was afraid of scratching it. It was a simple, heavy band of white gold. I had placed it on his finger 6 years ago, my hands trembling with hope. Now, my hands were still. I picked it up. It felt cold and heavy, a dead weight. I walked to the banker's box by the door, which contained my laptop and important files. From a side pocket, I pulled out a small padded envelope, the kind used for shipping jewelry. I dropped the ring inside. It landed with a soft, muffled clink. I sealed the envelope. On the front, I had already affixed a printed label. It was addressed not to our home, but to his office. Marcus Thorne, CEO Tech Solutions, Inc., 401 Blackwell Street, Durham, NC. It was a business transaction, the return of company property. No note, no drama. Just a final, clean severance. I placed the sealed envelope on the polished granite of the kitchen island, right in the center, where he would be sure to see it the moment he walked in. It was the only thing I was leaving behind, a symbol of an absence. The movers were prompt and professional. In under an hour, the few things that defined my existence in that house were gone, loaded into a truck. I did a final walkthrough, the empty closets, the bare surfaces on my side of the bathroom vanity, the space on the bookshelf where my engineering texts used to be. The house looked the same, but it was hollowed out. Her absence, I thought with a strange sense of detachment, was now a character in the story. I locked the door behind me for the last time, dropping the key into my purse. I got into my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. I just drove, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The temperature of the day was cool and clear, surveyed, measured, every line drawn straight. I was driving toward a blueprint that was, for the first time, entirely my own. The first call came at 1:27 p.m. I was in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the large warehouse-style windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The place was empty, echoing, and smelled of fresh paint. It was the most beautiful smell in the world. I saw his name flash on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. The second call came at 1:29 p.m. I ignored it. The third at 1:30 p.m. ignored. Then the texts began, a rapid-fire cascade of confusion and demand. Where are you? The house is empty. What the hell is going on? Pick up your phone, Yvette. This isn't funny. Call me, now! I watched the messages pile up one after another, a digital tantrum. I felt nothing. It was like watching a storm from behind a reinforced window. The chaos was on the other side. An hour later, a new name flashed on my screen. Trina. I smiled, a small, grim smile. The reinforcements had been called in. I let it go to voicemail, too. Her text followed moments later. Yvette, Marcus is worried sick. He said you're not answering. What did you do? Please call me. This is crazy. What did you do? Not what happened? The blame was already assigned. I was the perpetrator of this disruption. Her use of the word crazy was deliberate, a well-worn tool used to dismiss female emotion as irrational. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking. I made my bed. I put my books on the new shelves I'd had installed. I arranged my small collection of framed architectural prints on the wall. With each box I emptied, the apartment felt more like mine. The silence was a balm. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful one. Around 7 p.m., Marcus called again. This time I answered. I sat on a cardboard box, looked out at the darkening Durham skyline, and held the phone to my ear. What the hell, Yvette? He exploded, his voice tight with panic and rage. Where are you? What is all this? You just left? Took your stuff and left? What kind of childish game is this? I waited for him to finish. The silence stretched. Are you going to say anything? He demanded. There's nothing to say, Marcus, I said, my voice quiet and even. Nothing to say? You blow up our entire life and you have nothing to say? Our friends, our families? What am I supposed to tell them? The performance. Always about the audience. I'm sure you and Trina will come up with something, I said. It was the first real blow I had landed, and I felt its impact in his sudden, sharp intake of breath. What is that supposed to mean? He shot back. Trina is just trying to help. She's worried about you. We're all worried. You're being incredibly dramatic. I'm not being dramatic, I said, and the words came out with the simple, irrefutable force of a mathematical proof. I'm being precise. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, trying to regain control. His anger wasn't working, so he shifted tactics. The negotiator emerged. Okay, he said, his voice softening, becoming reasonable. Okay, look. I don't know what this is about, but clearly you're upset. I get it. I've been working a lot. I've been distracted. But we can fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Just come home and we'll talk. Really talk. The time for talking was 6 months ago, Marcus, I said. 6 months ago? What happened 6 months ago? He sounded genuinely bewildered. He had told so many lies, he couldn't keep track of the timeline of my potential discoveries. The geotechnical report was filed on April 12th, I said. The what? What are you talking about? You're not making any sense. Goodbye, Marcus. I hung up. He tried calling back twice. I didn't answer. The next day, the envelope with his ring would arrive at his office. The symbolism would be unmistakable. This wasn't a temporary separation. It was a dissolution. The final confrontation happened a week later. He showed up at my new apartment building. He must have sweet-talked the front desk person, because my intercom buzzed and it was the lobby guard saying, Ms. Dubois, your husband is here to see you. I took a deep breath. Send him up. I was not afraid. I was ready. This was the final inspection. When I opened the door, he looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot. His clothes were rumpled. The confident, charming salesman was gone. In his place was a tired, desperate man. He walked in, looking around the sparse, clean space. His eyes landed on the drafting table I had set up by the window, covered in blueprints for my pedestrian bridge project. So this is it, he said, his voice flat. You had this all planned out. Yes, I said. He turned to face me, his face a mixture of anger and a raw, pleading vulnerability I had never seen before. For how long, Yvette? How long have you known? Known what? I asked quietly. I wanted him to say it. I wanted him, for once, to name the thing he had done. He couldn't. Known whatever it is that made you do this, he said, his voice rising. What did I do that was so bad you had to sneak out like a thief? I didn't sneak, Marcus. I left. There's a difference. He ran a hand through his hair, his whole body thrumming with agitation. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you yell at me? Why didn't you give me a chance to fix it? A chance to fix it, or a chance to create a new story with Trina? I asked. My question was calm, a simple request for clarification. His face crumpled. That was the moment he knew I knew everything. Not just about one lie, but about the whole system. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a pathetic, dawning horror. The texts, he whispered. You saw the texts. I just looked at him. My silence was the only confirmation he needed. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He was replaying the last 6 months in his head, seeing them for what they were. My quiet agreement, my lack of arguments, my steady, calm presence. He was seeing it not as contentment, but as a long, silent judgment. And then his horror curdled into accusation. He saw my quiet endurance not as a product of his deceit, but as a trap I had laid for him. You knew, he said, his voice trembling with a new kind of rage, the rage of the exposed. You knew for months. You let me keep talking. You let me say it. He took a step closer, his finger jabbing in the air between us. You let me say I'd never lie to you for months knowing I was. You set me up. There it was. The most honest thing he had ever said to me. In his world, my knowledge of his lies was a greater sin than the lies themselves. My refusal to participate in his drama by confronting him was a betrayal. I had deprived him of the opportunity to manage the narrative. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at him, this man whose entire world was built on a foundation of performance, and I delivered my final report. You think my silence was a trap, Marcus? I said, my voice low and steady, but you're wrong. I took a small step back, creating a clear line of demarcation between us. I didn't set you up. I paused, letting him absorb the words. I saw the flicker of hope in his eyes, the thought that this might be a reconciliation. I extinguished it with the simple, structural truth. I just stopped holding you up. He had no response to that. It was a fact as solid and immovable as concrete. He just stood there, the last of his scaffolding kicked out from under him, and for the first time, he had to bear his own weight. He sagged, all the fight gone out of him. He looked around my apartment again, at my new life taking shape without him, and he seemed to shrink. He left without another word. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, not in grief, but in final, bone-deep relief. The demolition was complete. My new life began to take shape, line by line, like one of my blueprints. The quiet of my apartment was a gift. It was a productive quiet, filled with the scratching of my pen on vellum, the hum of my computer, and the soft strains of the music I liked, not the jazz he'd insisted on. I worked on my bridge project with a focus and clarity I hadn't had in years. It was a beautiful design, elegant and strong, a structure that would serve the community, that would connect two places safely and reliably. It was honest work. My vindication wasn't loud. It wasn't about seeing him fail. In fact, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was struggling. Without me to manage his contracts and his social life, his performance at work had slipped. Trina was apparently trying to help, but her brand of aggressive protection wasn't a substitute for my quiet competence. I felt no triumph in this news, only a distant sadness for the man he might have been if he hadn't chosen performance over substance. My victory was quiet. It was drinking coffee in the morning sun that streamed through my window without a knot of anxiety in my stomach. It was a Saturday spent hiking in the Eno River State Park, not waiting for someone to come home from golf. It was finishing my pedestrian bridge design and seeing it approved by the city council. At the presentation, my boss introduced me as the lead engineer, and the credit was entirely my own. I didn't have to share it. I didn't have to watch someone else accept the applause for my labor. I saw him one last time, about a year after I'd left. It was at a small cafe downtown. I was meeting a friend for lunch. He was ahead of me in line, ordering a coffee. He looked ordinary. The larger-than-life charisma he had always projected was gone. He was just a man, slightly stooped, looking tired. He turned from the counter and saw me. A flicker of panic crossed his face, followed by a dull resignation. "Yvette," he said, his voice quiet. "Marcus," I replied, my tone civil, neutral. An awkward silence fell between us. He gestured vaguely with his coffee cup. "You look good." "I'm well," I said. It was the truth. Not happy in a giddy, triumphant way, just well. Solid. I got the ring," he mumbled, looking down at his shoes. "At the office. That was clear." I just nodded. He looked up, and for a second, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd married, a flash of the old charm, the old hope that he could talk his way out of anything. "I miss you," he said. "I was an idiot. I know that now." The apology I had once craved now felt like a foreign currency, no longer valid in my new economy. I gave him a small, sad smile. "Who are you missing, Marcus?" I asked him, a genuine question. "Are you missing me? Or are you missing the woman who made everything so easy for you?" He had no answer. He just stared at me, the question hanging in the air between us like a bridge he could not cross. My friend arrived then, tapping me on the shoulder, and the moment was broken. I said a polite goodbye to Marcus and walked away. I didn't look back. Love, I have come to understand, is an engineering project. It requires a solid foundation of trust, an honest assessment of materials, and a shared commitment to maintenance. Some people, like Marcus, are not interested in the slow, unglamorous work of building something true. They prefer the facade, the performance. They build beautiful, hollow structures on unstable ground, and then act surprised when a stress event brings the whole thing crashing down. For years, I thought my job was to be the silent, load-bearing pillar. I thought my endurance was a measure of my love. I thought that if I was just strong enough, just competent enough, I could hold the entire structure up by myself. But that's not love. That's labor. And a bridge with only one pillar is not a bridge at all. It's a pier, extending out into nothing, leading nowhere. I didn't leave Marcus because I hated him. I left because I finally realized that my primary responsibility as an engineer is to the integrity of the structure. And the most important structure I will ever be tasked with building is my own life. You cannot build a future on a faulty foundation. Sometimes, the only way to build something that will last is to first be brave enough to schedule the demolition. My office is quiet now, the only sound the whisper of my pen across the page. I draw a straight line from my past to my future, and for the first time, I design the crossing myself. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.